Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video, I will be taking a look at another knife from France, and I know I mentioned a while back that I had quite a few French knives to talk about, so I figured why not start out with one of the more interesting and historic patterns. Now granted, this knife is rather new, all things considered, as it was designed in 1994, compared to some other knives such as the Layol, which has been around for well over 100 years. You can imagine that the Thiers pattern is actually quite new. Now, without further ado, this knife was purchased, again, from knifesoffrance.com. Lovely retailer. I've done business with them twice already. They're located in Texas, and they ship, I believe, all throughout North America. Shipping cost a flat rate of about $7, $7 or $10 if I remember correctly, and it took about 2 weeks to reach Alberta. So, very nice in terms of the shipping. They have a good selection of some very unique knives that you'd have trouble finding elsewhere, and also the blog, which makes for some excellent reading material and research on some select French patterns. So very nice website, and one that I would certainly recommend. Now, the Thiers. This is by Coutellerie au Sabot, just like the Langres, and it comes in the same black, white, and red box. This is a horn-handled knife. Again, you have your address and website here for au Sabot, and this is indeed made in France. Also included with the box, there is this little note about the knife, and it talks about the Thiers pattern a little bit, as well as how to care for your knife. So, pause the video if you would like to read any of that. Now, the Thiers. This is a pattern that very much interested me. And that's firstly due to the fact that, all things considered, this is a relatively new knife. The Thiers was designed originally in 1994, and its purpose was to be the official knife of the city of Thiers. Now, as many of you may know, French cutlery is an incredibly diverse and vast industry, and, well, I suppose you could almost call it history, as there are so many patterns and stories behind them. There's a mountain of knowledge that one could discover. But the Thiers knife is relatively new because the city of Thiers never had its own pattern, and considering that it was the capital of French cutlery, the equivalent of France's Sheffield or Zolingen, a guild of knife makers was formed, and they did so with the purpose of designing and perfecting a pattern strictly for the city of Thiers, creating a pattern that is just for the city and for its surrounding makers. This was the pattern that they invented. And again, it was originally designed in the 90s, so it's not even 50 years old, but the pattern has already gained a great deal of respect and renown all around the world. This particular take on the Thiers is somewhat a simple one, all things considered, as there are models featuring Damascus steel blades, file work, intricate locking mechanisms, and such like. This is a very traditional style. It's a slip joint with a forced notch mechanism, which creates a very nice snap when opening. And this is really the quintessential Thiers knife. I'd certainly say if you want to try this pattern out and you don't want to jump to one of the very expensive models by Fontenille-Pataude or Laguiole, or Forge de Laguiole, I should say. I believe they also produce some variety of the Thiers knife, unless I am mixing up my makers, which is very much possible. But I know some of the most expensive are from brands such as Fontenille-Pataude and also Thiers. What's the other one? Chambriard. Thiers from Chambriard. But regardless, Sabot, being a relatively inexpensive brand, has this model available, and this one was just under $60, I believe, 60 US dollars. And all things considered, for what you're getting, this is an absolute bargain. Unfortunately, however, the horn-handled variety has since sold out. I was lucky to get the last one, but it is available on Knives of France in juniper wood. So if you want this knife but don't really care what handle you're getting, it is still available. But the history behind the Thiers knife is very interesting. The Guild of Knife Makers came together and decided to design their very own pattern for the city of Thiers. And because of that, it is actually a trademark design. Unlike another long-lasting, well-regarded French knife such as the Laguiole, which is so old there is no form of copyright on it, anyone can make a knife and call it a Laguiole. This one is made by Laguiole Le Fidèle, but there are models by Forge de Laguiole, Laguiole and Aubrac, and dozens of knockoffs from China and the like that are by no means high quality. But because of that, unfortunately, it's harder to find an authentic Laguiole. The Thiers, however, is a knife that is not so easy to copy, as this knife is actually protected. The Thiers pattern, an authentic one that is, has a set list of rules and regulations that must be met to actually produce one of these. And some of the following requirements are that the maker is part of this Guild of Knife Makers in Thiers, that their design does not deviate terribly from the original Thiers design as it was made, and thus is approved by the Guild. The knife maker has to have 5 years or more of experience in the trade. They have to be using materials that are deemed quality by the Guild. And also, they have to be producing the knife entirely in or in the surrounding area of Thiers. They cannot make it, say, in the other side of France or in Germany, France I said twice. Germany, Italy, they can't make it outside of France and even outside of the immediate area of Thiers. Coutellerie au Sabot is located just outside of Thiers, only a few minutes out, mind you, and because of that, they are still allowed to produce this. However, if they were a few hours away, they would not be able to put this stamp on their knife. And speaking of which, this is the logo of the Thiers knife. You can see the little, it's very hard to see, but the little R symbol there. And another thing that all of these knives have to feature is the par and then the name of the maker. So if it was Thiers par Chambriard, Thiers par Le Sabot in this case. And the stamping is very well done here. You can see it's fairly deep into the blade. You also have your nail nick here, but the knife can easily be pinched open. There's also the Thiers logo little corner here in the box. And of course, it does say France. The steel on this is 12C27 Sandvik. Has a nice satin finish. Sandvik 12C27 is a very common type of steel to see on French knives. It's the same steel featured on this Laguiole here, and it's the same steel you will find on virtually every stainless steel Opinel, another famous French pattern. Dimensions for this knife, it's fairly large, but it's rather slender. So, get the measurements here. You're looking at an overall length of just a bit under 7.5 inches, an overall blade length of 3.25, and a cutting edge of 3. So a 3-inch cutting edge with an over 3-inch overall blade. I would deem this not legal to carry for my UK viewers. As I always say, I am no lawyer. Please do not consult me for legal advice. Ask someone who actually knows what they're talking about, such as a lawyer. But no, I would not recommend this for carry, as it is over that 3-inch limit. In the closed position, this has a very, very slim appearance. It would fit very well into a pocket, despite its size. And one thing I very much appreciate about this is its two-tone appearance. Now, this is something I've discussed before that I very much appreciate on knives. For example, here's a knife that does not fit with that. Now, this is a beautiful knife in its own right, but you can see there are 3 main colorations. There is the gold of the brass, the black of the ebony, and the silver of the steel. In the case of the Thiers here, we have the silver of the blade, bolsters, and spring, and then we have the coloration on the horn here. Now granted, the horn itself does feature a bit of diversity in its color scheme, but regardless, I still very much appreciate the clean look of this knife. The fit and finish on it is absolutely excellent considering its price. You can see there is very little gapping here. There might seem to be a bit more up here, but this is actually because the spring is ever so slightly recessed into the frame of the knife. You can see there. So it's actually not gapping, but rather the spring is just a little bit low. Everything is smooth on the back. The pins are perfectly flush. Everything is sanded and ground properly. One thing I do like about Coutellerie au Sabot is the fact that they forge their bolsters. Unlike many companies that just stamp them out using a CNC machine, au Sabot actually takes a piece of hot iron and shapes it into the bolster on each knife. This is something that you don't really see very much, but it can occasionally lead to some little markings on the top here that some might see as imperfections, but they are part of how the bolsters are made, and to me, I think it gives the knife a lot of character. The bolsters are again stainless steel and have a matte satin finish appearance. Blade centering is very, very good. I don't know if it's exactly down the center. You could maybe make the argument it's a little bit off to the right, but it's certainly not anywhere close to rubbing. The nail nick is easy to reach, and the pull on this is very, very gentle, I would say. I'd give it a good, maybe 5. It's definitely not hard to disengage, nor is it hard to open, but I would by no means call it a weak action. Again, I believe you can snap this knife shut and will not suffer any blade wrap, as there is a very slight bit of a kick at the bottom. But with most of my knives, and especially French knives, I don't want to risk it, so I just walk the blade shut, just to be sure that I'm not going to damage the edge. This knife did come fairly sharp. Brief cutting test here for you. If I can, perhaps not. So it does seem that the base part of the edge is a little bit less sharp than the rest. Not entirely sure why, but that is one thing that should be mentioned. I've used this knife a little bit, but not too much. But in terms of the factory edge, I would say it's usable, but not ideal. But a steel like 12C27, it wouldn't take much to get a bit of a strop on it and make it razor sharp once again. Blade play is non-existent on this piece, which is very, very good in my book. One thing I like is that the tang of the knife is flush with the bolster, making for a very smooth transition here. And the bolster section itself makes for a very nice place to choke up with your index and thumb. Just a very, very comfortable knife in the hand. Very simple design, just a very slightly tapered down, curved handle, and then the upswept drop point, almost Skinner blade. Very, very comfortable knife. That's something I don't always talk about, but this is an incredibly nice knife in the hand. If I had to compare it to the Layol in terms of comfort, I'd actually say that I prefer the Thiers, as the Layol is a little bit oddly proportioned in comparison. I find that the bolster does kind of sit a bit odd at the back of my hand, whereas the Thiers just feels a lot smoother overall. Again, that might be the individual knife, not the design, but I personally prefer the feel of the Thiers in hand over the Layol. And speaking of which, a size comparison between the two, you can see that they are very, very similar. The Layol has a little bit more usable cutting edge than the Thiers, but not by a whole lot. The knives are certainly similar, but there are some slight differences in blade shape and obviously the handle shape too. The handles here are this very nice black horn. One thing about French knives that I find interesting is that they never really specify the type of animal that this is coming from. With knives, say, out of Sheffield, particularly Taylor's Eyewitness as an example, they usually specify what kind of horn you're getting. So, for example, a lighter horn is ram horn, ox horn is somewhere in between ram horn and buffalo horn, which is typically the darkest of the three. But with these French knives, it was described as black horn, and then others are described as, say, blonde horn in comparison. And thus, I'm not going to make any pronouncement on what this came from. If I had to guess, this would be buffalo horn, but it could just as easily be cattle as well. But if you are curious about that, I'd suggest perhaps sending an email out to Stefan at Knives of France, as he will most likely be able to give you an answer that I cannot. But I very much like the pattern on this particular piece. I do think that this bluish gray area is very, very, very beautiful, but unfortunately it's only at the very base of this piece, and the rest is just that typical inky black that you will see with most buffalo horn. The other side has a bit of a different look. It's almost got a green lining throughout. It's very different compared to the other one. No blue in this side. But still a very, very nice piece of horn. Horn was a handle material I never used to like at first. I personally preferred jigged bone and wood, and while I still will certainly declare wood as my favorite handle material, I have really grown to liking horn as a handle. I think it has a lot of variation in it, and this is not the only French horn-handled knife that I have purchased lately, and in the next video or so, you will be seeing another example of horn and why I like it so much. It's very much like wood in the sense that as a natural material, no two pieces are alike, and that really adds to the uniqueness of each individual knife, something I much appreciate. But all in all, this knife is very well finished. You can nitpick things, perhaps. You can say that because the spring is a little bit recessed, it's not quite perfect there. You can say there's a little bit of a gap between the bolsters and the covers, even though I still believe that is largely due to the fact that natural materials will swell and shrink with the temperature and with moisture. You can also say that perhaps the bolsters have a little bit of gapping, or that the transition of the blade isn't perfect. But in terms of actual functional issues, this knife is completely free from them. The blade is sturdy, the action is smooth, the blade is not rubbing the inside of the liners. Again, the spring tension is very, very pleasant. This is a flat ground knife, which means it will be easy to sharpen. 12C27, once again, easy to get a nice razor-like edge. All in all, in terms of flaws, the only things you could really talk about here are just minor cosmetic issues. But as a knife, this is very functional and will absolutely perform as it is intended to. I very much like French knives of this caliber, and I frequently find myself using them to slice up bits of salami and fine French cheese, two things that I very, very much enjoy. And so knives like this, they actually get used a fair bit. I know this Layol has cut many a steak and such, and it has been resharpened quite a few times, and it's still going strong. So I very much like knives of this caliber, and I almost forgot to showcase the one other Thiers knife I have. And in comparison, this one by Sabot absolutely blows the competition away. Here it is next to the Thiers by Thiers. And immediately you can tell that there is a very noticeable difference in size, but the design is very much the same, all things considered. This one's a little bit more curved and has a bird's eye rivet as opposed to a bolster, and birch handles as opposed to horn. But both feature the Thiers logo and the Thiers stamp. Both feature 12C27 blades and steel liners and springs. So despite their obvious differences, these knives are still quite similar. The only thing is this knife has blade play, a fairly offset blade that's also close to proud, and it also has a recessed spring. So in terms of quality, this one absolutely blows this one away. So this is my second Sabot knife that I have discussed on the channel. I'm very pleased with the brand. I think that their quality is consistent. The prices are reasonable, and that goes and remains true, except once you get into the realm of the Damascus steel ones, which reach well into the hundreds, but that makes sense naturally. Regardless, this is a very beautiful knife, very sleek, very elegant, very comfortable in hand, and a knife that I could see myself using a lot. So I think I'm going to give the blade a strop, get it back to its razor sharp performance, and I will probably be using this quite a bit. So I very much enjoyed this knife for as long as I've had it, and I appreciate the history of the Thiers. Again, go check out Knives of France if you are interested in this or any other French knives. Thank you very much for watching. This has been the Thiers by Sabot, or Sabot, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.